Hello, it's Miss G back with more of The Wizard of Oz. Today, The Rescue. The Cowardly Lion was much pleased to hear that the Wicked Witch had been melted by a bucket of water, and Dorothy at once unlocked the gate of his prison and set him free. Her next act was to call all the Winkies together and tell them that they were no longer slaves. There was great rejoicing among the yellow Winkies, for they had been made to work hard during many years for the Wicked Witch, who had always treated them with great cruelty. They kept this day as a holiday, then and ever after, and spent the time in feasting and dancing. "If our friends, the Scarecrow and the Tin Woodman, were only with us," said the Lion, "I would be quite happy." "Don't you suppose we could rescue them?" asked the girl anxiously. "We can try," answered the Lion. So they called the yellow Winkies and asked them if they would help to rescue their friends. And the Winkies said they would be delighted to do all in their power for Dorothy, who had set them free from bondage. So she chose a number of the Winkies who looked as if they knew the most, and they all started away. They traveled that day and part of the next until they came to the rocky plain where the Tin Woodman lay, all battered and bent. His axe was near him, but the blade was rusted and the handle broken off short. The Winkies lifted him tenderly in their arms and carried him back to the yellow castle again, Dorothy shedding a few tears by the way at the sad plight of her old friend, and the Lion looking sober and sorry. When they reached the castle, Dorothy said to the Winkies, "Are any of your people tinsmiths?" "Oh, yes. Some of us are very good tinsmiths," they told her. "Well, then bring them to me," she said. And when the tinsmiths came, bringing with them all their tools in baskets, she inquired, "Can you straighten out those dents in the Tin Woodman and bend him back into shape again and solder him together where he's broken?" The tinsmiths looked the Woodman over carefully and then answered that they thought they could mend him, so he would be as good as ever. So they set to work for 3 days and 4 nights, hammering and twisting and bending and soldering and polishing and pounding at the legs and body and head of the Tin Woodman until he was straightened out and his joints worked as well as ever. When at last he walked into Dorothy's room and thanked her for rescuing him, he wept tears of joy, and Dorothy had to wipe every tear carefully from his face with her apron so his joints would not be rusted. "If only we had the Scarecrow with us again," said the Tin Woodman, "I should be quite happy." "We must try to find him," said the girl. So she called the Winkies to help her, and they walked all that day and part of the next until they came to the tall tree in the branches of which the winged monkeys had tossed the Scarecrow's clothes. It was a very tall tree, and the trunk was so smooth that no one could climb it, but the Woodman said at once, "I'll chop it down, and then we can get the clothes." Now, while the tinsmiths had been at work mending the Woodman himself, another of the Winkies, who was a goldsmith, had made an axe handle of solid gold and fitted it to the Woodman's axe instead of the old broken handle. Others polished the blade until it glistened like burnished silver. As soon as he had spoken, the Tin Woodman began to chop, and in a short time the tree fell over with a crash, whereupon the Scarecrow's clothes fell out of the branches and rolled off on the ground. Dorothy picked them up and had the Winkies carry them back to the castle, where they were stuffed with nice, clean straw. And behold, here was the Scarecrow as good as ever, thanking them over and over again for saving him. Now that they were reunited, Dorothy and her friends spent a few happy days at the Yellow Castle, where they found everything they needed to make them comfortable. But one day the girl thought of Aunt Em and said, "We must go back to Oz and claim his promise. Let us start for the Emerald City tomorrow." This they decided to do. The next day they called the Winkies together and bade them goodbye. The Winkies were sorry to have them go, and they had grown so fond of the Tin Woodman that they begged him to stay and rule over them and the Yellow Land of the West. Finding they were determined to go, the Winkies gave Toto and the lion each a golden collar. To Dorothy they presented a beautiful bracelet studded with diamonds. To the Scarecrow they gave a gold-headed walking stick to keep him from stumbling, and to the Tin Woodman they offered a silver oil can inlaid with gold and set with precious jewels. Every one of the travelers made the Winkies a pretty speech in return, and all shook hands with them until their arms ached. Dorothy went to the witch's cupboard to fill her basket with food for the journey, and there she saw the golden cap. She tried it on her own head and found it fitted her exactly. She did not know anything about the charm of the golden cap, but she saw that it was pretty, so she made up her mind to wear it and carry her sunbasket in the basket, her sunbonnet in the basket. Then, being prepared for the journey, they all started for the Emerald City, and the Winkies gave them 3 cheers and many good wishes. The Winged Monkeys. You will remember there was no road, not even a pathway, between the castle of the Wicked Witch and the Emerald City. When the 4 travelers went in search of the witch, she had seen them coming, and so sent the Winged Monkeys to bring them to her. It was much harder to find their way back through the big fields of buttercups and bright daisies. They knew, of course, they must go straight east toward the rising sun, and they started off in the right way. But at noon, when the sun was over their heads, they did not know which was east and which was west. And that was the reason they were lost in the great fields. They kept on walking, however. "If we walk far enough," said Dorothy, "we must come to some place." But day by day passed away, and still they saw nothing before them but the scarlet fields. The Scarecrow began to grumble a bit. Then Dorothy lost heart. She sat down on the grass and looked at her companions, and they sat down and looked at her. And Toto found that for the first time in his life he was too tired to chase a butterfly that flew past his head. So he put out his tongue and panted and looked at Dorothy to ask what they should do next. "Suppose we call the field mice," she suggested. "They could probably tell us the way to the Emerald City." "To be sure they could," cried the Scarecrow. "Why didn't we think of that before?" Dorothy blew the little whistle she had always carried about her neck since the Queen of the Mice had given it to her. In a few minutes they heard the pattering of tiny feet, and many of the small gray mice came running up to her. Among them was the Queen herself, who asked in her squeaky little voice, "What can I do for my friends?" "We have lost our way," said Dorothy. "Can you tell us where the Emerald City is?"
"Certainly," answered the Queen, "but it's a great way off, and you have had it at your backs all this time."
Then she noticed Dorothy's golden cap and said,
"Why don't you use the charm of the cap and call the Winged Monkeys to you? They will carry you to the City of Oz in less than an hour."
"Oh, I didn't know there was a charm," answered Dorothy in surprise. "What is it?"
"It is written inside the golden cap," replied the Queen of the Mice. "But if you're going to call the Winged Monkeys, we must run away, for they're full of mischief and think it's great fun to plague us."
"Won't they hurt me?" asked the girl anxiously.
Oh, no, they must obey the wearer of the cap. Goodbye.
And she scampered out of sight with all the mice hurrying after her. Dorothy looked inside the golden cap and saw some words written upon the lining. These she thought must be the charm, so she read the directions carefully and put the cap upon her head. "Eppy, peppy, khaki," she said, standing on her left foot. "What did you say?" asked the Scarecrow, who did not know what she was doing. "Hi-lo, ho-lo, hello," Dorothy went on, standing this time on her right foot. "Hello," replied the Tin Woodman calmly. "Zizzy, zuzzy, zik," said Dorothy, who was now standing on both feet. This ended the saying of the charm, and they heard a great chattering and flapping of wings as the band of winged monkeys flew up to them. The king bowed low before Dorothy and asked, "What is your command?" "We wish to go to the Emerald City, but we've lost our way." "We will carry you," replied the king, and no sooner had he spoken than two of the monkeys caught Dorothy in their arms and flew away with her, while others took her friends. "Why do you have to obey the charm of the golden cap?" she asked. "That's a long story," answered the king with a laugh. "But as we have a long journey before us, I will pass the time by telling you about it, if you wish. Once we were a free people, living happily in the great forest, flying from tree to tree, eating nuts and fruit, and doing just as we pleased without calling anybody master. Perhaps some of us were rather too full of mischief at times, but we enjoyed every minute of the day. There lived here then, away at the north, a beautiful princess named Gayelette, who was also a powerful sorceress. All her magic was used to help the people, and everyone loved her. At last she found a boy who was handsome and manly and wise beyond his years. When he grew to manhood, Quaylala, as he was called, was said to be the best and wisest man in all the land, while his manly beauty was so great that Gayelette loved him dearly. My grandfather was at the time the king of the winged monkeys, which lived in the forest near Gayelette's palace. And the old fellow loved a joke better than a good dinner. One day my grandfather saw Quaylala walking beside the river. He was dressed in a rich costume of pink silk and purple velvet, and my grandfather thought he would see what he could do. At his word, the band flew down and seized Quaylala and dropped him into the river. "Swim out, my fine fellow!" cried my grandfather. Quaylala was not in the least spoiled by all his good fortune. He laughed and swam into shore. But when Gayelette came running out to him, she found his silks and velvet all ruined by the river. The princess was angry. She had all the winged monkeys brought before her to punish them, but Quaylala said a kind word for them, so Gayelette finally spared them on condition that they should ever after do 3 times the bidding of the owner of the golden cap. This cap had been made for a wedding present to Quaylala. That is why we are 3 times the slaves of the owner of the golden cap. "And what became of them?" asked Dorothy, who had been greatly interested in the story. "Quaylala, being the first owner of the golden cap," replied Monkey, "he was the first to lay his wishes upon us. As his bride could not bear the sight of us, he called us all to him in the forest after he had married her, and ordered us always to keep where she could never again set eyes on a winged monkey, which we were glad to do, for we were all afraid of her. This was all we ever had to do until the golden cap fell into the hands of the Wicked Witch of the West, who made us enslave the Winkies, and afterward drive Oz himself out of the land of the West. As the Monkey King finished his story, Dorothy looked down and saw the green, shining walls of the Emerald City before them. The strange creatures set the travelers down carefully before the gates of the city. The king bowed low to Dorothy and then flew swiftly away, followed by all his band. The discovery of Oz the Terrible. The four travelers walked up to the great gate of Emerald City and rang the bell. After ringing several times, it was opened by the same guardian of the gates they had met before. "What? Are you back again?" he asked in surprise. "I thought you had gone to visit the Wicked Witch of the West." "We did visit her," said the Scarecrow, "but now she's melted." "Melted? Well, that is good news indeed," said the man. "Who melted her?" "It was Dorothy," said the Lion gravely. "Good gracious!" exclaimed the man, and he bowed very low indeed before her. Then he led them into his little room and locked the spectacles from the great box on all their eyes, just as he had done before. Afterward, they passed on through the gate into the Emerald City. When the people heard from the guardian of the gates that Dorothy had melted the Wicked Witch of the West, they all gathered around the travelers and followed them in a great crowd to the Palace of Oz. The soldier with the green whiskers was still on guard before the door, but he let them in at once. There they were again met by the beautiful green girl, who showed each of them to their old rooms at once so they might rest until the great Oz was ready to receive them. The soldier had the news carried straight to Oz that Dorothy and the other travelers had come back again after destroying the Wicked Witch. But Oz made no reply. They thought the great wizard would send for them at once, but he did not. They had no word from him the next day, nor the next, nor the next. The waiting was tiresome and wearing, and at last they grew vexed that Oz should treat them in so poor a fashion after sending them to undergo hardships and slavery. So the Scarecrow at last asked the green girl to take another message to Oz, saying if he did not let them in to see him at once, they would call the winged monkeys to help them and find out whether he had kept his promises or not. When the wizard was given this message, he was so frightened he sent word for them to come to the throne room at 4 minutes past 9 o'clock next morning. He had once met the winged monkeys in the land of the West, and he did not wish to meet them again. Promptly at 9 o'clock the next morning, the green-whiskered soldier came to them, and 4 minutes later they all went into the throne room of the great Oz. Of course, each one of them expected to see the wizard in the shape he had before, and all were greatly surprised when they looked about and saw no one at all in the room. They kept close to the door and closer to one another, for the stillness of the empty room was more dreadful than any of the forms they had seen Oz take. Presently they heard a solemn voice that seemed to come from somewhere near the top of the great dome. "I am Oz, the great and terrible. Why do you seek me?" They looked again in every part of the room, and then, seeing no one, Dorothy asked, "Where are you?" "I am everywhere," answered the voice, "but to the eyes of common mortals I am invisible. I will now seat myself upon my throne that you may converse with me." Indeed, the voice seemed just then to come straight from the throne itself. So they walked toward it and stood in a row. "We have come to claim our promise, O Oz," Dorothy said. "Is the Wicked Witch really destroyed?" asked the voice, and Dorothy thought it trembled a little. Yes, she answered. I melted her with a bucket of water. Dear me, how sudden. Well, come to me tomorrow, for I must have time to think it over. You've had plenty of time already, said the Tin Woodman angrily. You must keep your promises to us, exclaimed Dorothy. The Lion thought it might be as well to frighten the Wizard, so he gave a large, loud roar, which was so fierce and dreadful that Toto jumped away from him in alarm and tripped over the screen that stood in the corner, and as it fell with a crash, they looked that way, and the next moment all of them were filled with wonder. For they saw, standing in just the spot the screen had hidden, a little old man with a bald head and a wrinkled face, who seemed to be as much surprised as they were. The Tin Woodman, raising his axe, rushed toward the little man and cried out, "Who are you?" I'm Oz, the great and terrible," said the little man in a trembling voice, "but don't strike me. Please don't, and I'll do anything you want me to." Our friends looked at him in surprise and dismay. "I thought Oz was a great head," said Dorothy. "And I thought Oz was a lovely lady," said the Scarecrow. "And I thought Oz was a terrible beast," said the Tin Woodman. "And I thought Oz was a ball of fire," exclaimed the Lion. "No, you're all wrong," said the little man meekly. "I have been making believe." "Making believe!" cried Dorothy. "Are you not a great wizard?" "Hush, my dear," he said. "Don't speak so loud, or you will be overheard and I should be ruined. I'm supposed to be a great wizard." "And aren't you?" she asked. "Not a bit of it, my dear. I'm just a common man." "You're more than that," said the Scarecrow in a grieved tone. "You're a humbug." "Exactly so," declared the little man, rubbing his hands together as if it pleased him. "I am a humbug." "But this is terrible," said the Tin Woodman. "How shall I ever get my heart?" "Or I my courage?" asked the Lion. "Or I my brains?" wailed the Scarecrow, wiping the tears from his eyes with his coat sleeve. "My dear friends," said Oz, "I pray you not to speak of these little things. Think of me and the terrible trouble I'm in at being found out." "Doesn't anyone else know you're a humbug?" asked Dorothy. "Surely you cannot have kept the secret so long." "No one knows it but you four and myself," replied Oz. "I have fooled everyone so long I thought I should never be found out. It was a great mistake my ever letting you into the throne room. Usually I will not even see my subjects, so they believe I am something terrible." "But I don't understand," said Dorothy in bewilderment. "How was it that you appeared to me as a great head?" "It was one of my tricks," answered Oz. "Step this way, please, and I'll tell you all about it." He led the way to a small chamber in the rear of the throne room, and they all followed him. He pointed to one corner in which lay the great head, made out of many thicknesses of paper, and with a carefully painted face. "This I hung from the ceiling by a wire," said Oz. "I stood behind the screen and pulled a thread to make the eyes move and the mouth open." "But how about the voice?" she inquired, remembering how it had impressed her. "Oh, I am a ventriloquist," said the little man. "I can throw the sound of my voice wherever I wish, so that you thought it was coming out of the head. Here are the other things I used to deceive you." He showed the Scarecrow the dress and the mask he had worn when he seemed to be the lovely lady. And the Tin Woodman saw that his terrible beast was nothing but a lot of skins sewn together with slats to keep their sides out. As for the ball of fire, the false wizard had hung that also from the ceiling. It was really a ball of cotton, but when oil was poured upon it, the ball burned fiercely. "Really," said the Scarecrow, "you ought to be ashamed of yourself for being such a humbug." "I am. I certainly am," answered the little man sorrowfully. "But it was the only thing I could do. Sit down, please. I will tell you my story." So they sat down and listened while he told the following tale. "I was born in Omaha," the wizard began, to the little girl's great surprise. "Why, that isn't very far from Kansas," cried Dorothy. "No, but it's farther from here," he said, shaking his head at her sadly. "When I grew up, I became a ventriloquist, and at that I was very well trained by a great master. I can imitate any kind of bird or beast." Here he meowed so like a kitten that Toto pricked up his ears and looked everywhere to see where she was. "After a time," continued Oz, I tired of that and I became a balloonist." "What's that?" asked Dorothy. "A man who goes up in a balloon on circus day so as to draw a crowd of people together and get them to pay to see the circus," he explained. "Oh," she said, "I know. Well, one day I went up in a balloon and the ropes got twisted so that I couldn't come down again. It went way up above the clouds so far that a current of air struck it and carried it many, many, many miles away. For a day and night I traveled through the air, and on the morning of the second day I awoke and found the balloon floating over a strange and beautiful country. It came down gradually, and I was not a bit hurt. But I found myself in the midst of a strange people who, seeing me come from the clouds, thought I was a great wizard. Of course I let them think so, because they were afraid of me and promised to do anything I wished them to. Just to amuse myself and keep the good people busy, I ordered them to build this city and my palace. And they did it all willingly and well. Then, as I thought the country was so green and beautiful, I would call it the Emerald City. And to make the name fit better, I put green spectacles on all the people so that everything they saw was green. The Emerald City was built a great many years ago, for I was a young man when the balloon brought me here, and I am a very old man now. But my people have worn green glasses on their eyes so long that most of them think it really is an Emerald City, and it certainly is a beautiful place, abounding in jewels and precious metals and every good thing that's needed to make one happy. I've been good to the people, and they like me. But ever since this palace was built, I have shut myself up and would not see any of them. One of my greatest fears was the witches, for while I had no magical powers at all, I soon found out that the witches were really able to do wonderful things. I lived in deadly fear of them for many years. So you can imagine how pleased I was when I heard your house had fallen on the Wicked Witch of the East. I was willing to promise anything if you would only do away with the other witch. Now that you have, I'm ashamed to say that I cannot keep my promises." "I think you're a very bad man," said Dorothy. "Oh, no, my dear. I'm really a very good man, but I'm a very bad wizard, I must admit." "Can't you give me brains?" asked the Scarecrow. "You don't really need them, but I shall be unhappy without them." "Well," said Oz with a sigh, "I'm not much of a magician, as I said, but if you will come to me tomorrow morning, I will stuff your head with brains. I cannot tell you how to use them, however. You must find that out for yourself." "Oh, thank you, cried the Scarecrow. "I'll find a way to use them, never fear." "But how about my courage?" asked the Lion anxiously. "You have plenty of courage, I'm sure," answered Oz. "All you need is confidence in yourself. There's no living thing that's not afraid when it faces danger. True courage is in facing danger when you are afraid, and that kind of courage you have in plenty." "Perhaps I have, but I'm scared just the same," said the lion. "I shall be very unhappy unless you give me the sort of courage that makes one forget he's afraid." "Very well, I will give you that courage tomorrow," replied Oz. "How about my heart?" asked the Tin Woodman. "Why, as for that," answered Oz, "I think you're wrong to want a heart. Makes most people unhappy. If you only knew it, you're in luck not to have a heart." "That must be a matter of opinion," said the Tin Woodman. "For my part, I will bear all the unhappiness without a murmur if you will give me the heart." "Very well," answered Oz meekly. "Come to me tomorrow, and you shall have a heart. I've played wizard for so many years that I may as well continue the part a little longer." "And now," said Dorothy, "how am I to get back to Kansas?" "We shall have to think about that," replied the little man. "Give me 2 or 3 days to consider the matter, and I'll try to find a way to carry you over the desert. In the meantime, you shall all be treated as my guests, and while you live in the palace, my people will wait upon you and obey your slightest wish. There is only one thing I ask in return for my help, such as it is. You must keep my secret and tell no one I am a humbug." They agreed to say nothing of what they had learned, and went back to their rooms in high spirits. Even Dorothy had hope that the great and terrible humbug, as she called him, would find a way to send her back to Kansas. And if he did, she was willing to forgive him everything. And that's the end of the story for today. Thank you. Have a good day.